A letter arrives from beyond the grave, impossible, yet deadly true. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Tell me where you're listening from below. Your voices matter here. Let's begin the mystery. It is not in my habit to place before the public those singular episodes in Mr. Sherlock Holmes's career which touch, however distantly, upon the private griefs of families. The world is eager enough for sensation, and there are corners of domestic life which, once exposed to the harsh daylight of print, are never again permitted their proper shadows. Yet there are cases in which the lesson is so clear, the method so instructive, and the danger of misunderstanding so great, that silence becomes a kind of complicity. Such a case was that which Holmes himself, in one of his rarer moods of retrospection, I entitled The Letter Written After Death. I write of it now not because it is the most violent of his adventures. There was little blood spilt in it and no shot fired in Baker Street, nor because it carried with it any of those theatrical climaxes which delight the popular imagination. I write of it because it afforded, perhaps better than any other, an example of that cold, exact, and yet strangely human reasoning by which Holmes could strip falsehood of its finery and lay bare the naked mechanism beneath. It was in the autumn of '89, one of those London seasons when the fog lies low like a yellow wool upon the streets, and every gas lamp is surrounded by a trembling halo, that Holmes returned one evening from a solitary excursion in a condition which with him was as unmistakable as a trumpet call. He did not speak when he came in. He hung his coat with a precision that was almost aggressive, crossed to the mantelpiece, and stood with his long, nervous fingers pressed together, staring down at the little heap of tobacco ash upon the rug, as if it were a diagram drawn by an invisible hand. "You have something on your mind," I ventured, for I had learned by experience that silence in Holmes was seldom empty. He glanced at me with that half-amused, half-contemptuous expression, which he reserved for my more obvious observations. "My dear Watson," said he, "I have always something on my mind. The question is whether my mind has something on yours." I smiled at the thrust. "Then I shall plead guilty in advance," said I. "But you have the air of a man who has been met by a problem." Holmes's thin lips curved. "Not met," said he, "brushed, like the wing of a bat in the dark. One feels it, but one cannot yet say whether it is bird or phantom." He sank into his chair and drew his violin case toward him, as if from long habit, but did not open it. "Before our visitor arrives," said he abruptly, "tell me, what do you make of this?" He held out his hand. Between his finger and thumb was a scrap of paper no larger than a postage stamp. It was torn with some violence, and upon it was the faintest impression of writing, an inked indentation rather than letters, for the surface had been rubbed with bread or pumice until only the pressure remained. I took it and held it toward the lamp. "It appears to be part of a letter," said I. "The words are incomplete. I can make out, do not trust, and after I'm gone." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Excellent. And what else?" I turned it over, but the back was blank save for a smudge of sealing wax and the ghost of a watermark when held to the light. "There is red wax," said I, "and the paper is of good quality, perhaps from a private stationery. The watermark, if I am not mistaken, is that of Crown and P and S beneath," said Holmes, as if reciting a familiar prayer. "Precisely, but I cannot place it." "Pilkington and Smythe," said he, "suppliers to half the respectable households in the West End. And now, why would any man take a letter, tear away a portion no larger than your thumbnail, and rub the remainder until it cannot be read, yet keep this fragment?" "To preserve a warning," I suggested. "Or because it is all that remains?" Holmes gave a little impatient shrug. A warning, yes, but whose? And why keep the warning and destroy the rest? It is the reverse of sentiment. Most men would save the loving phrases and burn the venom. He leaned forward. It came from a pocket, said he, not from a desk. It was carried, folded many times. It was handled frequently, for the edges are darkened with finger oil. And the wax, look here, only a trace. It was sealed once, but the seal was broken long ago. He was interrupted by a brisk rap at the door below, followed by Mrs. Hudson's familiar shuffle in the passage. "A client," said Holmes with sudden animation. "Now, Watson, let us see if the bat is bird or phantom." Mrs. Hudson ushered in a gentleman whose appearance, even in the first glance, was sufficient to arrest attention. He was tall and spare, with that austere carriage which suggests either military habit or hereditary pride. A grey moustache, cut short and brushed with care, concealed the line of his mouth, but nothing could conceal the anxiety which had eaten into the corners of his eyes. His clothes were of excellent material, though they hung upon him as if he had lost weight rapidly and without intention. Under his arm he carried a flat leather case, such as one might use for documents. He paused upon the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room with a caution bordering upon suspicion. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said he at last. Holmes rose and bowed with languid courtesy. "At your service. Pray take the chair by the fire. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson." The man inclined his head, though his eyes returned at once to Holmes, as if Watson were merely part of the furniture that came with the consulting room. "My name is Julian Ambrose," said he. "I am—" He hesitated. As though the words were distasteful. "I am the secretary to Lady Havisham of Rotherfield House." Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw that quick flicker of attention which always told me that some thread had been caught. "Indeed," said Holmes, "and I take it your errand concerns her ladyship?" "It concerns her," said Ambrose, "and the late Lord Havisham." The phrase "the late," so commonplace in London, drawing-rooms and obituary columns, fell from his lips with a heaviness that made it new. Holmes's fingers, which had been resting upon the arm of his chair, tightened slightly. "You say the late," said he, "then Lord Havisham is dead." Ambrose's face hardened. "He died 8 days ago." "And yet," said Holmes softly, "a letter has arrived." Ambrose's eyes flashed. "You have been told?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not told," said he. "But one does not come to me after 8 days of mourning with a leather case and that expression unless something has violated the natural order." Ambrose's composure, such as it was, faltered. He took the seat offered and drew a long breath, as if the act of beginning were a physical effort. "My lord died," said he, "after a short illness. He was at Rotherfield House. The physicians called it inflammation of the lungs, pneumonia perhaps, though I am not competent to dispute them. He was 72, but he had the vigour of a man of 60. He had been in London only briefly in the summer and returned to the country for the shooting season. He took to his bed on the 9th, worsened on the 10th, and on the morning of the 11th He stopped, and his hand went unconsciously to his moustache. Holmes's voice was unexpectedly gentle. "Pray proceed at your own pace, Mr. Ambrose." Ambrose nodded stiffly. "He died," said he, "and the household entered mourning. Lady Havisham bore it with remarkable fortitude. There were arrangements, papers, solicitors. Lord Havisham's estate was large. There are tenants, charities, investments. In such a situation, even grief must put on a coat and go about its work. Yesterday," he continued, "a letter arrived by the afternoon post. It was addressed to Lady Havisham in my lord's own hand." Holmes sat very still. "In his hand," said he. "You are certain?" "I have served him 12 years," said Ambrose. "I have opened his correspondence, copied his dictations, read his notes. I would know his hand among 1,000. "And the postmark?" asked Holmes. "London, Charing Cross district. I dated—" He opened the leather case with trembling fingers and drew out an envelope. "The 10th. Holmes held out his hand. Ambrose hesitated a fraction of a second, as if parting with the thing were dangerous, and then surrendered it. I watched Holmes as he examined it, not in the clumsy manner of a man reading, but with that swift, selective scrutiny which made his gaze seem to move in layers. He smelled the paper, held it to the light, ran a finger along the flap, and finally glanced at the corner where the black-edged mourning border lay thick against the cream. "It is not mourning stationery," said he. Ambrose started. "No, it is ordinary." "And yet it was sent to a house in mourning," said Holmes, "and addressed to a widow. Curious, but not conclusive. Go on." Ambrose drew out the letter itself. It was a single sheet, folded once. And the handwriting upon it was strong and slightly slanted, with those decisive strokes which betray a man accustomed to command rather than entreat. At the bottom was a signature, Edmund Havisham. I confess that as I saw that bold name, I felt an unreasonable chill, as though something in the ink were colder than ink should be. Holmes read it once quickly, then again more slowly. He handed it to me without comment. It ran thus: "My dearest Margaret, if this reaches you, it means I have not. There is no need for you to mourn me overmuch. I have had my share of days, and I have spent them with you. But I must leave you with a warning, which I cannot, in honour, neglect. There is one among those who stand nearest to you who has a hand in my going. Do not trust—" Here the sentence was broken by an abrupt tear. The remainder of the page had been roughly rubbed, leaving only stains and torn fibres. Below this mutilation there remained, however, 3 lines which had not been fully destroyed. "Tell Julian, keep the papers from him, after I am gone." The words were incomplete, the meaning tantalizing. The very violence of the destruction suggested passion. I looked up at Ambrose. His face had gone a shade paler. This is what you received?" "It is," said he. "As you see, part of it has been deliberately effaced. Someone tore the middle and destroyed the rest, yet left enough to—" He broke off and spread his hands helplessly. "To poison," said Holmes calmly. "To cast suspicion without offering proof, to set a household by the ears, to turn servants into spies and relatives into enemies." Ambrose swallowed. "Lady Havisham has not seen it," said he. Holmes's eyebrows lifted. "She has not?" "I intercepted it," said Ambrose, and there was a hint of pride in his tone. "It came with the usual post. I saw my lord's hand and—" His voice caught. "Forgive me, Mr. Holmes, but the sight of it— I thought at first some cruel joke was being played. And then?" "And then I read it," said Ambrose, "and I could not place it in her hands without first knowing what it meant. Her ladyship has suffered enough. If this were false, if some blackguard sought to torment her, then I would spare her. If it were true—" His jaw clenched. "Then I would not have her walk blindly among murderers." Holmes's eyes had grown very bright. "You have done something both brave and foolish," said he. "Brave, because you acted. Foolish, because you have concealed from your mistress a document which concerns her life and fortune. Still, brave men often begin by being foolish." Ambrose coloured, but held his ground. "I came to you," said he, "because I know your reputation. I came to you because Scotland Yard would blunder into the house like a bull into a conservatory. If my lord was murdered, I want the truth quietly, efficiently. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. Tell me of Lord Haversham's household, said he. Who stands nearest Lady Havisham? Ambrose's gaze went to the fire. There is Captain Lionel Havisham, said he at last, my lord's nephew and heir, presumptive. Presumptive, said Holmes. My lord had no children, Ambrose explained. Lady Havisham has no issue. Captain Lionel would inherit the title and the bulk of the estate. Holmes nodded slightly. Go on. There is Mr. Rupert Vale, said Ambrose, Lady Havisham's brother, a charming man, He hesitated, and the hesitation was eloquent. A charming man with debts, said Holmes, as if finishing a sentence. Ambrose's eyes snapped up. Yes, and someone else, said Holmes. A woman, perhaps. Ambrose's face tightened. Miss Evelyn Carr, said he, Lady Havisham's companion. She has been with her ladyship these 3 years. She is devoted. Holmes's tone remained mild. Devotion is often the cloak of ambition, said he. Any others? A doctor? A solicitor? Dr. Hargreaves attended my lord, said Ambrose, and the family solicitor is Mr. Pelham of Lincoln's Inn. Holmes's fingers tapped softly upon the chair arm. Now, said he. You spoke of pneumonia. Was there anything unusual in the illness? Ambrose frowned. Unusual? He had a chill after walking the grounds in damp weather. He coughed. He became feverish. The doctor prescribed poultices and draughts. He worsened. And on the night of the 10th, the date upon this envelope, who sat with him? Ambrose's reply came too quickly. Lady Havisham. Holmes's eyes did not leave him. Alone? Ambrose hesitated. Only a fraction, but enough for Holmes. No, said Ambrose reluctantly. Miss Carr also at intervals. And once Captain Lionel came in, but he stayed only 10 minutes. Holmes's head tilted, as if listening to a distant sound. And you, Mr. Ambrose? I was in the house, said Ambrose. I was managing the correspondence. There was a great deal to arrange, and I did not sit at the bedside. Holmes rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. You say the letter was postmarked London, the 10th, said he. Yet Lord Havisham was in Rotherfield House, in the country, and in bed on the 10th. How far is Rotherfield from town? 2 hours by train, said Ambrose. We take the line from Victoria, change at— That will do, said Holmes. Now ask yourself, if Lord Havisham wrote this letter on the 10th, when did he write it? Before he took to his bed, during his illness? And if during, how did it reach London, to be posted at Charing Cross? Ambrose spread his hands. That is why I am here. Holmes turned, and for an instant there was something almost eager in his expression, as if the very challenge were nourishment. And why, said Holmes, Sadie, was the letter mutilated? If it were the work of a prankster, why trouble to efface it? If it were the work of Lord Havisham, why write and then destroy? If it were the work of another, why leave those fragments which point the finger, yet name no one? Ambrose leaned forward. What do you think? Holmes gave him a long, measuring look. I think, said he, that someone wished Lady Havisham to believe that her husband spoke from beyond the grave. And I think that someone, in attempting to be subtle, has committed an error. What error? Cried Ambrose. Holmes smiled. The error of assuming that the dead have no habits, said he. Now, Mr. Ambrose, tell me, does Lord Havisham ever cross his T's with a hook? Ambrose blinked. A hook? Holmes held up the envelope. Here, said he, pointing. In Havisham. The cross-stroke curves upward at the end. That is a habit, like a man's gait. Now, in the letter itself, the T in trust, such as remains, is crossed straight. Ambrose stared. "But it proves nothing," said Holmes, cutting him off lightly. "It suggests, and suggestions properly arranged become proof." He returned to his chair and sat down with decision. "Watson," said he, "we shall go to Rotherfield House." My heart gave that little leap, which it always did, at the prospect of action. "At once?" "At once," said Holmes. "Fog is an excellent concealment for villainy, but it is also an excellent curtain behind which to do one's work. Mr. Ambrose, you will return ahead of us and behave as if nothing has occurred. You will not show this letter to Lady Havisham. You will not mention my name. You will say, if pressed, that you have consulted Mr. Pelham about some minor matter of accounts." Ambrose rose. "You will come?" Holmes's eyes were like steel now. "I will come," said he. "And if Lord Havisham's last words were forged, I shall know by what hand. If they were genuine, I shall know why they were silenced." Ambrose hesitated. "There is one more thing," said he. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Yes?" Ambrose drew a small object from his pocket. It was the torn scrap of paper which Holmes had shown me earlier. "This," said Ambrose, "was found this morning in my lord's dressing-room, in the waste-basket, burned partially as you see." Holmes's fingers closed around it with a kind of quiet satisfaction. "So," said he softly, "the bat has brushed us twice." He rose, and for the first time that evening he opened his violin case, not to play, but to take from it a small morocco leather pouch in which he kept certain tools and instruments. He slipped it into his pocket as another man might slip in a revolver. "Come, Watson," said he, "your coat, your notebook. And if you have any lingering affection for the comforts of Baker Street, take a last look at them. Country houses have their own fogs, and they are not always made of vapour." As we descended the stairs, I could not shake the image of that bold signature, Edmund Havisham, and the broken words that clung to the torn fibres like a voice caught between worlds. "Do not trust after I am gone." It is a strange thing, even for a man who has served in war and seen death in its franker guises, to feel the cold touch of something that pretends to be a message from the grave. Yet I had learned, in Holmes's company, that the most terrifying ghosts are not those of the dead, but those manufactured by the living. And somewhere, out in the London fog, a hand had dipped a pen in ink and written as if it were already beyond the reach of justice. The journey to Rotherfield House was made under that dull, oppressive sky which seems peculiar to the outskirts of London, where the city's breath still lingers, but the open country offers no relief. Holmes sat opposite me in the railway carriage, silent and composed, his long fingers folded loosely about his knee. Yet I knew better than to mistake his stillness for idleness. His eyes, half-lidded, followed reflections in the glass with the same intentness he might have given to a suspect's face. We arrived shortly after dusk. Rotherfield House lay some distance from the small station, and a carriage, plain but well kept, waited for us. The drive wound through bare-limbed trees whose branches clawed at the fog, and when at last the house emerged, it did so reluctantly, as if summoned against its will. It was a large, square structure of pale stone, with a pillared portico and tall windows now dulled by drawn curtains. Morning hung about it as tangibly as the mist. Ambrose received us in the front hall. His manner was outwardly unchanged, yet I detected a nervous vigilance in the way his eyes flicked toward the staircase and the closed doors beyond. "Lady Havisham has retired early," he said in a low voice. "The day has been taxing." Holmes inclined his head. "Then we shall endeavour not to tax her further," said he. "Show us the dressing room." The room lay on the ground floor, adjoining what had once been Lord Haversham's private study. A fire smouldered faintly in the grate, and the air retained the heavy sweetness of extinguished tobacco. Upon a small table stood a shaving brush, a silver-backed hand mirror, and a decanter of brandy, its stopper replaced with meticulous care. Holmes moved at once to the waste-basket. He drew it toward the lamp and examined its contents piece by piece, as calmly as a botanist sorting leaves. Ash, scraps of paper, the charred corner of an envelope. "This was burned today?" he asked. "This morning," said Ambrose, "after the room had been cleaned." Holmes glanced up. "And the servants?" "Mrs. Allen, the housemaid. She has worked here 15 years. "Loyalty is a habit," said Holmes, "and habits can be imitated. Now this letter. Where was it kept?" Ambrose indicated a small escritoire by the window. "In the top drawer. My lord kept only a few personal papers there." Holmes opened the drawer. It was almost empty now, too empty, I thought, for a man of business. Holmes noted it too, for his brows drew together slightly. "Removed in haste," he murmured, "or removed with purpose." He crossed to the window and looked down at the gravel drive below. "No sign of recent disturbance," said he. "No footprints. Whoever posted that letter did not leave from here." He turned to Ambrose. "Tell me precisely when Lord Haversham was last able to write." Ambrose considered. "On the evening of the 9th. He dictated a short note to me regarding the tenant's rents. On the 10th he was weaker, he spoke little. Yet someone wishes us to believe that on the 10th he wrote a letter of reflection and warning," said Holmes. "A letter sufficiently composed to speak of death, but insufficiently urgent to name a culprit." He bent over the writing table and examined the inkstand. "Fresh ink," he said. "Used recently, but not, I think, by your lord." "How can you tell?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "The nib," said he, holding up a pen. "It is bent slightly to the left. Lord Haversham, from all accounts, was right-handed. A leftward bend suggests either a left-handed writer or an inexperienced one forcing the angle." Ambrose shifted uneasily. "You suspect—" "I suspect nothing," said Holmes. "I observe." Footsteps sounded in the corridor. What Ambrose stiffened, but it was only a young woman who entered, carrying a tray. "Tea, Mr. Ambrose," said she softly. Her voice was pleasant, controlled. She was tall, with dark hair, arranged plainly, and eyes that held one's gaze with a curious steadiness. "Miss Carr," said Ambrose, "this is Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson." She inclined her head. "Lady Haversham said you were expected," she said. "She hopes you are comfortable." Holmes regarded her with interest. "You were with Lord Haversham on the night of the 10th, said he. Miss Carr did not flinch. "Yes." "Alone?" "No, her ladyship was present." Holmes nodded. "And did his lordship speak of writing letters?" "No. Did he speak of fear?" She hesitated. "He spoke of unease, of having trusted wrongly." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Trusted whom?" Miss Carr's lips pressed together. He did not say." Holmes turned away as if satisfied, and took up the teacup she offered. "Thank you, Miss Carr." When she had gone, Ambrose let out a breath. "You think her capable of this?" Holmes sipped thoughtfully. "I think her capable of restraint," said he, "which is far more dangerous." We were interrupted again, this time by the entrance of a man whose confident stride and military bearing left no doubt as to his identity. "My uncle's room?" he said sharply. "And strangers in it?" "Captain Haversham," said Ambrose hastily. "These gentlemen are—" "I know who he is," said the captain, fixing Holmes with a cold stare. "London's pet bloodhound." Holmes smiled amiably. "A flattering exaggeration," said he, "though I do sniff from time to time." Captain Lionel's mouth twitched. You have no business here." "On the contrary," said Holmes, "I have every business here. If your uncle's last words were falsified." The captain stiffened. "Falsified?" Holmes held up the envelope. "Posted in London, dated while your uncle lay dying in the country, written in a hand that mimics but does not match his own." Captain Lionel's gaze flickered just for an instant to the writing table. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one," said Holmes mildly. "Yet." The captain laughed shortly. "This is absurd. My uncle died of illness. The doctors said so." "Doctors observe symptoms," said Holmes. "They do not always observe motives." Captain Lionel turned sharply on Ambrose. "You should have given that letter to my aunt." "I sought counsel first," said Ambrose. "And instead you invite this man to stir suspicion," snapped the captain. "If there is poison here, it is of your making." Holmes's voice was quiet, but it carried. "Tell me, Captain, on the morning of the 10th, where were you?" "With my uncle, briefly." "And afterward?" "I returned to the village. I sent a telegram." "To whom?" Captain Lionel hesitated. "To my solicitor." Holmes nodded. "From which office?" "The post office near the station." Holmes's eyes met mine for the briefest moment. I understood then the Charing Cross postmark was not a certainty, but an assertion, one that could be imitated by a man who knew the routes. "Thank you, Captain," said Holmes. "That will do for now." Captain Lionel flushed. "This is not over." "No," said Holmes, "it is only beginning." Later that night, as we sat in the small guest room allotted to us, Holmes paced slowly before the hearth. "The letter is a construction," said he. "A device meant to redirect suspicion after death. The question is, redirect from whom?" "And the motive?" I asked. Holmes stopped and looked at me keenly. "Inheritance is the obvious one," said he, "which is why it is almost certainly a false trail. The true motive lies with the papers Lord Havisham warned of. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall find them." "And if they are gone?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Then we shall find who took them. For thieves, like writers of ghostly letters, always leave something behind, even when they believe they have erased it." Outside, the fog thickened against the windows, pressing closer, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Morning broke reluctantly over Rotherfield House, as though the sun itself were loath to intrude upon so sombre a dwelling. A thin, colourless light filtered through the curtains, revealing the outlines of furniture like shapes remembered rather than seen. Holmes was already awake when I stirred. He sat by the small writing desk, boots on, chin resting lightly upon his knuckles, his gaze fixed upon the faint impression of frost on the window pane. "You have not slept," I said. "On the contrary," said he, "I slept admirably until 4 minutes past 5. At which point a most obliging blackbird began repeating the same phrase outside our window. I recommend it as a mnemonic device. One remembers everything when irritated." He rose at once. "Come, Watson, the house will begin to move soon, and I wish to be ahead of it." We descended quietly and found Ambrose already at work in the breakfast room, poring over papers with the air of a man who has not removed his coat since yesterday. "You have news?" said Holmes. Ambrose looked up sharply. "Yes, Lady Havisham wishes to see you." Holmes paused. "Now?" "She insists. She was distressed upon waking." Holmes inclined his head. "Then we shall not keep her waiting." Lady Havisham received us in a small sitting-room overlooking the garden. She was a tall woman with iron-grey hair, and a face whose lines spoke of long command and recent suffering. She did not rise when we entered, but fixed Holmes with a penetrating gaze. "So," said she, "you are the man who reads messages from the dead." Holmes bowed slightly. "I read messages from the living, my lady. The dead are usually more honest." Her lips tightened, but there was a flicker of reluctant amusement in her eyes. Then tell me this. Why has my secretary hidden my husband's letter from me?" Ambrose stiffened. "My lady," she silenced him with a gesture. "I have lived with Edmund Havisham for 40 years. I know his hand, his temper, his secrets, and I know when a thing is kept from me." Holmes stepped forward. "Because, Lady Havisham, the letter is dangerous," said he. "Not because it accuses, but because it accuses without clarity. It invites suspicion where there may be none, and conceals intention where there may be guilt." She regarded him steadily. "Do you believe my husband was murdered?" "I believe," said Holmes carefully, "that his death has been used." Her expression hardened. "By whom?" "That is what I am here to determine." She studied him a moment longer, then rose. "Very well. You shall have your run of the house, but understand this. Mr. Holmes, if you stir scandal without cause, I shall hold you personally responsible." Holmes inclined his head. "A risk I accept." When she had gone, Holmes turned at once to Ambrose. "The study," said he. "Now." The study lay beyond the dressing-room, and it was clear at a glance that it had been disturbed, not ransacked, but rearranged. Books stood in new orders, drawers were shut too neatly. "Someone searched," I said. "Yes," said Holmes, "and someone wished it not to look like searching." He moved directly to a tall cabinet and opened it. Inside were shelves once laden with leather-bound volumes. Several were missing. "Account books," said Ambrose quietly. "Private investments. My lord kept them here." Holmes nodded. "And among them, something else." He knelt and examined the carpet beneath the desk. "There," said he, pointing. "A faint mark. A safe was once fixed here." Ambrose frowned. "There was a small iron safe. It was removed 2 days ago." "By whom?" "By Captain Lionel. He said it was to be delivered to Mr. Pelham, the solicitor." Holmes straightened. "Without your lordship's instructions?" "After his death," said Ambrose. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And did anyone see what was inside?" "No." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, note the sequence. A letter warning against trust. Papers to be kept from someone. A safe removed promptly and quietly." He rose and crossed to the fireplace. "Now observe this." He indicated the hearth. The ashes had been swept, but not thoroughly. Holmes sifted them with a paper knife and extracted a small, warped object. "A seal," he said, "broken, with the Havisham crest." Ambrose stared. "That should be in the desk." "Should," said Holmes. "But it was used recently and not here." A sudden sound of raised voices drifted from the hall. Holmes's head snapped up. "That," said he, "is our next development arriving without invitation." Captain Lionel burst into the study, his face flushed. Miss Carr followed closely, her composure strained. "This has gone far enough," the captain said. "My aunt is being upset. Papers are missing, accusations whispered." Miss Carr spoke sharply. "Captain, you removed the safe. You have no right to complain of scrutiny." He rounded on her. "I did what was necessary." "For whom?" she demanded. Holmes interposed smoothly. "For yourself, perhaps. Or for Lady Havisham. Or for someone else entirely." The captain's jaw tightened. "You are out of your depth." Holmes smiled. "Oh, I have not yet begun to wade." He turned to Miss Carr. "You said Lord Havisham spoke of having trusted wrongly. Did he name papers?" She hesitated. He spoke of figures, of mistakes that could ruin reputations. Holmes nodded. And did he say whose? No. Holmes looked to the captain. Your uncle's investments, were any irregular? The captain laughed harshly. Every estate has irregularities. Indeed, said Holmes, but not every estate has a letter written after death to conceal them. The captain stepped back, pale now. This is madness. Holmes's voice sharpened. On the contrary, it is method. The letter was meant to be found after the papers were removed, to explain their absence and direct suspicion toward a convenient figure. But its author underestimated one thing. And that is, said Miss Carr, that habits survive illness, said Holmes, and that fear makes men sloppy. He turned to Ambrose. Who handled the post on the morning of the 10th? I did, said Ambrose. And briefly Miss Carr assisted me. All eyes turned to her. She met them calmly. I sorted envelopes, said she, nothing more. Holmes regarded her intently. And yet you were with Lord Havisham at night, aware of his fears, and had access to the desk. You are capable, restrained, and devoted. An excellent combination for inheritance or for protection. Her eyes flashed. I would never harm him. I believe you, said Holmes. The captain stared. Then you accuse me. I accuse you of impatience, said Holmes. You moved the safe too quickly. The letter was meant to prepare the ground. It arrived before the house had time to forget. The captain sank into a chair. You cannot prove— I do not need to, said Holmes quietly. The proof lies in what the safe contained, and where it is now. Silence fell. Outside, a carriage rolled along the drive. Holmes turned toward the window. That, said he, will be Mr. Pelham or the police. Either way, the time for rearranging truth has passed. He looked back at us, his expression alight with that peculiar mixture of excitement and gravity I knew so well. The letter, said he, was not written by a dead man, but it was written for one, and now we shall hear what the living have to say when the papers speak for themselves. The sound of the carriage drew nearer, its wheels crunching upon the gravel with a deliberation that seemed almost ominous. Holmes did not move at once. Instead, he crossed the room and closed the cabinet from which the books had been taken, as though tidying the scene before the next act. Watson, said he quietly, observe who arrives, and how. We stepped into the hall as the front door was opened. A stout gentleman descended from the carriage, his movements brisk despite his years. He carried a dispatch case and wore the unmistakable expression of a man accustomed to handling other people's difficulties for a fee. Mr. Pelham, said Ambrose with evident relief. The solicitor removed his gloves. Lady Havisham sent for me, said he. There has been some confusion regarding certain documents. Holmes stepped forward. Indeed there has, said he pleasantly. And you have brought the safe? Pelham started. The safe? Holmes's eyes rested upon the dispatch case. Or its contents, he amended. Hallam stiffened. I was instructed by Captain Havisham to take possession of the papers for safekeeping, Holmes finished. An excellent word. It conceals much. Captain Lionel, who had followed us into the hall, flushed angrily. I acted in my aunt's interests. Then you will not object to transparency, said Holmes. Mr. Pelham, may we examine the contents of your case? Pelham hesitated, then looked to Lady Havisham, who had entered quietly behind us. She inclined her head once. Proceed, said she. Pelham opened the case. Inside were ledgers, loose papers, and a small bundle tied with ribbon. Holmes took up one of the ledgers and leafed through it rapidly. His expression grew intent. As I thought, said he, discrepancies, transfers made through intermediaries, funds diverted, legally perhaps.
Ah, but secretly. Lady Havisham's face had gone pale. Edmund never told me, because he did not trust what might happen if you knew, said Holmes gently. These papers detail a series of charitable endowments made under false names. Your husband was correcting an injustice committed years ago. Captain Lionel stared. That is absurd. Why conceal charity? Holmes fixed him with a sharp look. Because it was not merely charity. The funds originated from investments tied to colonial ventures, ventures that harmed people who could not seek redress. Lord Havisham was undoing his own past. There was a long silence. And someone, Holmes continued, feared what would happen if these papers came to light, feared scandal or loss. Captain Lionel's voice was hoarse. He was ruining the estate. He was saving his conscience, said Holmes.
Well, Miss Carr spoke for the first time. He told me, she said quietly. He said the truth must be preserved, even if it cost him. All eyes turned to her. You knew, said Lady Havisham slowly. Yes, said Miss Carr, and I swore to protect his wishes. Holmes nodded. Which is why you did not write the letter, said he. It was too clumsy, too theatrical. You would have destroyed it entirely. Captain Lionel sprang to his feet. Then who? Holmes turned to him. You did, said he calmly. Or rather, you arranged it. You had motive, access, and impatience. You removed the safe before the letter had done its work. That was your mistake. Pelham looked aghast. Captain, is this true? The captain's defiance crumbled. I only meant to delay, he said, to keep matters quiet. Oh, the letter was meant to give time, to suggest suspicion elsewhere. Elsewhere? Holmes raised an eyebrow. Toward whom? Captain Lionel said nothing. Holmes's voice hardened. Toward Ambrose, said he, the trusted secretary. Tell Julian. Keep the papers from him. A neat inversion, Ambrose recoiled. You would have ruined me. Yes, said Holmes, and you underestimated the man you tried to ruin. Lady Havisham sank into a chair. Edmund warned me, she whispered, and I did not hear him. Holmes softened his tone. He trusted you, said he, enough to believe the truth would surface. A knock sounded at the door, firm, official. Holmes straightened. That, said he, will be Scotland Yard. The ensuing moments were brisk and businesslike. Captain Lionel was led away, pale and silent. The papers were secured, statements were taken. But when at last the house grew quiet again, Holmes and I stood by the window, watching the fog thin in the late afternoon light. It is a curious thing, I said, how a man may speak most loudly after death. Holmes smiled faintly. Or how others may attempt to speak for him, said he. The dead rarely lie, Watson. It is the living who struggle to keep their stories straight. Lady Havisham approached us. Mr. Holmes, said she, you have my gratitude and my regret. Holmes bowed. Regret is the beginning of wisdom, said he, and wisdom, like truth, has a way of enduring. As we took our leave, I reflected once more upon that torn scrap of paper, that ghostly voice which had set so much in motion. It had not been written after death, but it had been written in fear of truth. And that, I had learned, is often motive enough. Aye, though the outward machinery of justice had begun to turn, Holmes did not share the air of completion which usually accompanies the handover of a culprit. As the constable's footsteps faded down the drive, and the house settled once more into uneasy quiet, he remained by the window, his gaze fixed not upon the departing carriage, but upon the darkened line of trees beyond the lawn. You are not satisfied, I said. Holmes did not answer at once. He took up his pipe, filled it carefully, and lit it with deliberate slowness. Satisfied, Watson, is a word I distrust, said he at last. It is too often the lullaby of error. But Captain Lionel, I began, is guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and a very pretty attempt at posthumous ventriloquism, said Holmes. Yes, but that was never the most interesting question. And that question is? Whether Lord Havisham died as a sick man, said Holmes quietly, or as a silenced one. The words sent a chill through me. You believe he was murdered? I believe, said Holmes, that his death was convenient, and convenience is the cousin of design. We were interrupted by Ambrose, who had returned from seeing the officers off. His face was drawn, but there was a new steadiness in his manner. Lady Havisham wishes to know if there is anything further you require, said he. She is exhausted. Holmes turned. One thing, said he. Dr. Hargreaves. Ambrose nodded. He's still in the village. Then ask him to attend us, said Holmes, and while you're about it, bring whatever remains of Lord Havisham's medicines. Ambrose departed without question. I guess you intend to challenge the medical conclusion? I asked. Holmes glanced at me. I intend to understand it. When Dr. Hargreaves arrived, he did so with the confidence of a man accustomed to being beyond reproach. He was florid, genial, and spoke readily of symptoms and treatments, of poultices applied, and fevers monitored. My lord's lungs were severely inflamed, said he. At his age, recovery was unlikely. And yet, said Holmes, he remained lucid until the final hours. Yes. And did he complain of pain beyond that expected? No, Holmes nodded. And did you administer anything besides the usual remedies? Dr. Hargreaves hesitated. Only a sedative to ease his rest. Holmes leaned forward. Which sedative? Chloral hydrate. Holmes's eyes sharpened. And in what dosage? The doctor named a figure. Holmes smiled thinly.
Oh, a generous dose, said he, for a man whose lungs were already compromised. Dr. Hargreaves bristled. It was within accepted practice. Accepted, said Holmes, is not the same as safe. The doctor coloured. Are you accusing me of malpractice? I am asking whether anyone else had access to the medicine, said Holmes. Dr. Hargreaves frowned. The bottle was kept in the dressing room. Holmes's gaze flicked to Ambrose, who had re-entered bearing a small tray of vials. Holmes took one, examined it, and held it to the light. Observe the stopper, said he. It has been wiped. Ambrose's breath caught. You think someone tampered with it? I think someone feared what Lord Havisham might say if he lived another day, said Holmes. Silence fell heavily. Miss Carr, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke.
Oh, Captain Lionel was not alone that night, said she. After he left the room, someone else came. Holmes turned to her swiftly. Who? I do not know, said she. I was dozing in the chair. I heard footsteps, soft ones. Holmes nodded. And did you see anyone the next morning? She hesitated. Dr. Hargreaves was already there. The doctor stiffened. I came when summoned. Holmes's voice was calm. Summoned by whom? Ambrose spoke slowly. By Lady Havisham. But the message was delivered by... He stopped. By whom? Said Holmes gently. By Mrs. Allen, said Ambrose, the housemaid. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And who has spoken to Mrs. Allen since? No one answered. Holmes moved quickly now. Watson, with me. We found Mrs. Allen in the servants' hall, her hands trembling as she polished already gleaming silver. At the sight of Holmes, and she broke down at once. I didn't mean any harm, she sobbed. I only did what I was told. Told by whom? Said Holmes softly. By the doctor, she whispered. He said give the draught when the master stirred. Said it would help him rest. Holmes straightened. And did it? Her sobs deepened. He never woke again. Dr. Hargreaves's protest died in his throat. The truth, once exposed, unfolded swiftly. The doctor had been involved, financially entangled in the very ventures Lord Havisham sought to undo. The safe's papers threatened not only scandal, but ruin. The forged letter was Captain Lionel's work, the altered medicine, the doctor's. Two conspiracies intersecting at a single death. As the officers returned, summoned anew, Holmes stood apart, his expression grave. "You see, Watson," said he quietly, "how rarely guilt travels alone. One man writes a letter, another administers a draft. Each believes himself indispensable." "And Lord Havisham?" I asked. Holmes looked toward the darkened study. "He tried to speak," said he, "and in trying, he hastened his own end." That evening, as we prepared to depart, Lady Havisham took Holmes's hand. "You have given me truth," said she, "at a terrible cost." Holmes bowed his head. "Truth is never cheap," said he, "but it is the only currency that lasts." The fog had lifted when we left Rotherfield House. Stars showed faintly overhead, and the road stretched clear before us. I glanced at Holmes. "Do you regret uncovering it all?" I asked. He shook his head. "Regret belongs to those who choose ignorance," said he. "We merely removed the veil." And with that, not the house, and the letter that was never truly written by the dead fell behind us, leaving only the quiet certainty that even the most carefully staged lies cannot survive close attention. We returned to Baker Street beneath a sky scrubbed clean by night air, the stars sharp and indifferent above the city's crooked roofs. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent during the drive, his chin sunk upon his breast, his fingers steepled, as though still weighing unseen measures. I knew that posture well. The case, though finished in the eyes of the law, had not yet been laid to rest in his own mind. It was only when Mrs. Hudson had closed the door behind us and the familiar clutter of our sitting-room reasserted its comforting dominion that he spoke. "A curious economy of guilt," said he at last. "Each man did only what was necessary, and no more, and Lionel forged the voice of the dead. Hargreaves hastened death itself. Each believed the other incidental." "And yet," I said, hanging up my coat, "it was their very division of labour that betrayed them." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. Crime shared is crime weakened. A single mind may preserve consistency. Two must coordinate, and coordination leaves traces." He crossed to the mantelpiece and took down his violin, running the bow experimentally across the strings without producing more than a thoughtful murmur. "Lord Havisham's tragedy," he continued, "was not merely that he was killed, but that he was misunderstood. He believed that truth, once written, would defend itself, but he underestimated the speed with which fear can falsify handwriting, and the ease with which medicine may be made to resemble mercy. I could not help but think of Lady Havisham, alone now in that great house, burdened not only with loss, but with revelation. "She will live with it," I said quietly. "Yes," said Holmes, "because she must. Grief imposed is cruel, grief informed is merely heavy." He set the violin aside. "Watson, you observed the letter closely. What struck you most?" "That it was incomplete," I replied. "That it hinted rather than accused." Holmes smiled faintly. "And therein lay its purpose. A complete accusation invites scrutiny. An incomplete one invites imagination. Lionel wished suspicion to bloom without guidance, like mould in a cellar. But he made one fatal error." "The handwriting," I said. "Or the habit," corrected Holmes. "Handwriting may be imitated, habit cannot. The crossing of a T, the spacing of words, the pressure at the end of a line, these are the unconscious signatures of character. Death does not erase them. Fear does not improve forgery." He moved to his chair and sat, suddenly weary. "There is a melancholy lesson in it," he added. "Men who wish to deceive after death must remember that the dead no longer change. It is the living who betray themselves by inconsistency." For a while we sat in silence, the fire settling into embers. At length Holmes spoke again, more lightly. "You will, I suppose, write this one up. If you permit it," he waved a hand, "so long as you spare me the more lurid embellishments. No ghosts, Watson. The public has enough superstition already." "And the title?" I asked. He considered. "Why, is the letter written after death will do. It is accurate, if only in intention." I smiled. "You are unusually philosophical." Holmes's lips curved. "A man who spends his life among motives must occasionally take stock of his own." He rose and went to the window, looking out over the quiet street. "There will be other cases," said he, "cruder ones, perhaps bloodier, but few will trouble me as this one did." "Why this one?" I asked. "Because it reminds us," he said, "that reason may uncover truth, but it cannot restore what truth destroys. Lord Havisham sought to correct his past. He succeeded at the cost of his future." I thought of the torn scrap of paper, the warning half erased, the voice that tried to speak and was silenced twice over, once by fear and once by ink. "And yet," I said, "the truth prevailed." Holmes turned. It is his expression unreadable. "Prevail is too strong a word," said he. "It emerged, like a body from water, changed by immersion, but recognizable." He glanced at the clock. "Come, Watson, it is late. Tomorrow London will present us with fresh absurdities, and we must be rested to meet them." As I retired, I reflected, as I have so often done, upon the strange duality of my friend's genius. He could dismantle the most elaborate deception with a few quiet observations, yet he never mistook that triumph for happiness. For Holmes, the game was never the glory of revelation, but the discipline of truth itself. And so ended the case of the letter that pretended to speak from the grave. It taught me, if nothing else, that the dead need no defense against lies, for it is the living, in their haste to conceal, who write the most damning words of all.